Buonasera a tutti, sono Paolo Ravazzani, il direttore dell'Istituto di Elettronica e di Ingegneria dell'Informazione e delle Telecomunicazioni del Consiglio Nazionale delle Ricerche, e siamo nell'anno nuovo, nel 2022, e riprendiamo i nostri giovedì dell'Istituto. Quest'oggi abbiamo il piacere di ospitare il dottor Hülsmann e lascio subito la parola per non perdere tempo e non far perdere tempo al dottor Hülsmann per primo. Ricordo soltanto che l'evento è registrato e che l'evento poi andrà, verrà pubblicato sul nostro account YouTube, e quindi chiunque non volesse essere ripreso semplicemente spegne la telecamera o non fa vedere la propria immagine. Passo subito la parola a Rosanna Fornasiero, che introdurrà il dottor Hülsmann e da lì in poi al dottor Hülsmann. Grazie a tutti e grazie a Rosanna, ti passo la parola.
Okay, thank you very much, Paolo. I want to thank again Thorsten for accepting our invitation. So this is, as Paolo was saying, every other Thursday we organize this kind of webinar to share advancement on different disciplines related to information and communication technologies. So here we have a lot of colleagues that are working in this area. We are engaged in several projects related to both application of information technologies to industrial, to manufacturing sector, as well as mobility and transportation. There is a high variability of application that we are taking into consideration in our institute. Let me introduce with few words Thorsten. Thorsten was, let's say, head of the strategic initiative at the Fraunhofer Institute of Material Flows and Logistics. Now he's mainly engaged in the International Data Space Association since a few years. This is an association which have more than 130 members from, I think, 20 countries, representing different sectors, both industrial sectors and ICT companies. So they work mainly on the definition of common standards for data sharing, and they keep alive the discussion on the importance of data in the current years. So they have been, they are still involved in several European projects and several European initiatives, and I think Thorsten this evening will talk about this and will give us some examples of the activities that they are doing. So I give you the floor, Thorsten. Thank you again, and so take your time. I think you have a presentation, and maybe you can start sharing it. And please, thank you again.
Thank you, Rosanna. Thank you, Direttore, for inviting me to this session. So I think now you should also see my PowerPoint slides, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. So I will talk in the next 30 minutes about an endeavor, about an initiative which is dealing with data spaces. And I want to try to explain what we have done in the last 4.5 or 5 years towards a standard for sovereign data sharing in a hyperconnected world. So you won't receive from me, I would say, groundbreaking research results, because first, I'm not a data scientist. I'm an economist and an economic geographer. So I really am not the tech guy, but I think to, well, give you a little bit of an overview what the International Data Spaces story has been in the last years. I think this is what I can definitely provide. It's maybe if you want, please interrupt me if there are any things unclear. We can also make it a little bit as a conversation if you wish. So I'm open to this. Yeah? So please do not hesitate just to interrupt me or write in the chat a question, and I try while I'm speaking also to answer or to include comments into my presentation. So I think, I mean, you are more expert than I am, and what I start with is normal to us right now, that there's a very heavy increase of global data volume, and if we see this projection of the European Commission 2 or 3 years ahead, then the numbers are really, really high. And also companies who are involved in business could use this data to add more value. We know this, and we are working on this since several years. And I think if we combine, or if we think about what we have done, what have research done, applied research and businesses, is that a lot about interoperability has been done in the last 10 years or so. But still we can observe, and I think this is a parallel in Italy as in Germany, companies don't share completely open their data, because especially SMEs, they either don't have the right skills, they are hesitating, or they don't see, they do not trust in partners in data ecosystems. And I want to elaborate a little bit why this is and why companies do not fully uptake on data sharing. I think while an increasing amount of data is being generated in general and in business especially, the cross-company and cross-border availability of such data remains too limited due to the lack of a data sharing framework, either in a nation, in a country, or in Europe, or maybe also globally. And for companies to add value, there are certain needs or requirements for data ecosystems. And I think, well, 4 of these requirements are especially important. First of all, the vendor independence is an issue which all companies and especially SME always say. We do not want to be depending on one big data platform. We do not want to be depending on one single IT service provider. Also, the connection of platforms is an issue, and also the openness to all at low cost. This is also an issue when you talk to companies and the respective departments, they usually share. And also the adaption, the easiness of adaption and the easy to use data sharing frameworks. This is also an issue which is not available yet, and therefore there are still well, I would say a lot of companies who have not really started in these data sharing ecosystems. I think if we think about what the data economy and this framework really is about, it is that the data economy involves many players, and the way the connection and the sharing of data in between companies is dramatically changing. And with this change, also the way companies have to prepare and the way companies do business today and in the future changes. So, for instance, here on the left side, what we are all used to is a bilateral data sharing, one-to-one, between one company and another company, between one department and another department, between one person and another one. Easy. We know this. We are doing this since decades. The closed community data sharing, few to few, is something which is where we are also used to, but still here, well, companies start to think about, oh, is it really possible? Can I trust another company when I share data, and what is the value of my data? And if we observe carefully the market adoption of data ecosystems, we see that nowadays there are more open dynamic data ecosystems, many to many. And the value creation in this data ecosystems is different from what we are used to. And the consequence is that different data must be brought together in a common ecosystem so that data-based business models become possible. And such an ecosystem must be, on the one hand side, open, must be interoperable, and it also must preserve data sovereignty. And this topic or this notion of data sovereignty, I want to elaborate a little bit more. So we see here this balance, and usually we are used to interoperability. Everyone has understood that data sharing or data-centric services is something every company is more or less involved in. But then, as I explained, when I start to share data, the question immediately starts: who owns the data? I mean, now from a legal perspective, we know that it's not possible to own data, because you cannot own something virtually. And then data security and the value of data. This is something, how I would call it, to square the circle. We have to overcome these directions or forces who are going in different directions. And therefore, I think it is interesting to think about data sovereignty, and not understood as the geographical sovereignty and the question where data is saved, for instance, in a country or in Europe or in China or in the US. No, data sovereignty should be understood as the ability of a natural or legal person to exclusively and sovereignly decide concerning the usage of data as an economic asset. In order to use data, the consumer or the business partner must accept certain usage policies and a governance scheme. And well, this type of data sharing, which is a sovereign data sharing, takes place in a data space. This is what we understand as data spaces. Well, and the question then is how to bring trust in data ecosystems. It is plug in or not to plug in. Participants in a data space need to take an informed decision about the trustworthiness of partners and components used. Because it's clear. I mean, everyone can use one single big data sharing platform, but the challenge is we do not know what the partner or the other side does with it. We do not even know who uses my data, and this is the general challenge. So the concept of data spaces is a concept for connecting all kinds of data endpoints. And if we look in a company ecosystem, maybe within an OEM and its suppliers, its first tier suppliers, one can say that a data space is the sum of all endpoints, data endpoints that are able to share data with each other. What is the requirement? It's a federated data architecture, what IDS developed in the last years. No physical data integration, leave the data where it is and only share the metadata. We are talking about interoperability, so we do not want to have, again, new IT silos. We do not want to have vendor dependency. And as I try to explain, data sovereignty and traceability is a key requirement and a key issue, and also a trusted partner network. At least when I am in such a data space, I need to trust the parties who are also connected. And this is maybe a graph view or a picture which illustrates the role models which IDSA has described in its reference architecture model, which was first published 3 years ago. And last year, the third edition, the IDS reference architecture model 3.0 was published. We are working currently on the 4th edition. And you see here that there are certain roles. For instance, a data provider could be a manufacturing company, a data consumer, and then certain other roles, for instance, a broker to find the right data or the participants. And everything is connected via an IDS connector. And I will come to this in a minute, what we understand as IDS connector. So this is quite abstract view, and I try to explain in the coming with the coming slides what are the key elements. So first, this data space approach which we proposed is built on 3 pillars. The first pillar is interoperability. So the requirement is to have an unlimited interoperability, and therefore the information model which is within the IDS reference architecture model is a key element to the standard for data flows between all kinds of data endpoints. And I think especially the commodity and the community of trust are additions of a standard information model, which are quite interesting to have a closer look to. The second pillar is trust between different security domains. So this is our certification model, which we proposed. And a connector is a component, a software component, which is certified to have comprehensive security functions, providing a maximum level of trust. There are two different ways of certification. On the one hand side, the component itself, the software will be or is to be certified, but also the organization itself is a subject of certification. And the third pillar is the governance for the data economy. And here especially technologies of usage control and usage constraints which are enforced for data flows is a key concept which is integrated in the reference architecture model of IDSA. And as Rosanna already introduced, IDSA is now a member-based organization with some 130 or 135 members with some years of data space engineering. There are more than 400 people who are continuously contributing to the working groups, but also to the open source repositories of IDSA. And we are active currently in 22 countries, just to give you an idea that this is a truly international endeavor, even though it started some 6 years ago in Germany, kickstarted by a group of German companies. So when we are talking now about the freedom which comes here, I think we can put this in a row. We have the reference architecture, which was developed. We are also working very extensively in use cases to demonstrate from the very beginning how the reference architecture and the certification scheme can be used in daily operations in companies. So these are the use case. We are also very active in international standardization. So some 3 years ago, we started with a German DIN standard, with a DIN spec. It is 27070, which was then last year started to bring into the international standardization in the ISO environment. And as I explained, also the support for certification is a crucial element. And we started 1.5 years to bring all these reference implementation also in an open source community. I will explain this in a minute. And in general, IDSA is a non-for-profit organization. We are not allowed to make any commercial revenues. We are a standard development organization, so this is our core. The coding and the establishment of software components, this is done by the market, by the commercial companies who are interested in working with our achievements. So in summary, these thorough bases for data spaces, as I tried to explain, is first trust, then the security and data sovereignty approach, the ecosystem of data, where the IDS architecture pursues the idea of decentralized data storage. Data physically remains with the data owner or the data creator until it is transferred to a trusted party. Also, the standardized interoperability is the fourth key aspect. Value-adding apps or programs, for instance, by app injection into the IDS connectors is a possible. And finally, this IDS approach enables then the creation of data-driven services and fosters new business models for participants in those data ecosystems. I want to describe a little bit also how the IDS governance is brought into practice. So we have a rule book which comes into place to explain how the reference architecture model is brought into practice. In this rule book, it is precisely described how these rules for data sharing could be implemented in an organization, in a company. We also are talking about minimal viable data spaces and the components which are included in a reference testbed where software testing is made possible. And these portfolios are then brought into certain building blocks, which are on the one hand side experimented in research projects. I will come to an overview, but also in use cases. And these projects and use cases are showcased in our use case radar. I will show this in a minute. And the companies who are involved or who are interested, whether they are members of our association or they are not, it's open for everyone, are taking these building blocks and experimenting it, implementing it. And we try to receive by this an adoption in the industry. And if we combine this, or if we focus again, what are the key elements? We can maybe talk about this triangle. We call it internally the magic triangle. What makes IDSA a reliable base for these sovereign data sharing, which we call data spaces? It is first, as I tried to explain, the reference architecture, the blueprint for data spaces with detailed specifications. And the open source building blocks comprise the magic triangle together with the certification scheme. So they enable even non-IDSM members to participate in the projects, which are vital of IDS to enter into commercial uptake, into commercial setups. And in sum, this triangle provides everything what is needed to share data in this trusted way, or to ensure trust in data spaces. Again, to show this in a row: open standard, reference architecture model, third-party conformity, our certification scheme, then the description how to implement or how to get started, which is described in the rulebook, which was jointly created last year by all our members. Then the uptake reference implementation in our IDSG open source community. This is I would call it an open source landscape, maybe a GitHub where 30+ repositories are available, where you can find the base reference implementations like the IDS connector, information model, usage control schemes, metadata broker, and things like this. And altogether, this is a maintainer for a minimal viable data space, which is governed by the technical steering committee of IDSA. And then finally, what I tried to describe with the use case and the projects, we call it our adoption accelerator, where the de facto standard is set, where businesses can adapt what is available and implement it. So I think this altogether is available. If you are interested, every documents are available via our homepage, the reference architecture model, and also the rulebook, the certification scheme as well. And here maybe again a more detailed explanation when we are talking about the certification of components. The question is, how can we secure that the component which is used, and here the evaluation and certification of the core components is based on whether they provide the required functionality, interoperability, and security regarding the security profiles. So this can also be done automatically in a testbed which is available. And when we are talking about the operational environment, we are talking about a company and organization where these components run. So the question here is, with whom do I want to share my data? This is also part. The rulebook, which is available in version 1.1, is also accessible via our homepage. So for those of you who are interested, have a look what this rulebook is containing. So functional agreements, technical agreements, operational agreements, these are all topics which are described in detail. Also legal aspects of data sharing and commercial assumption for implementation of IDS reference architecture. For those of you who are interested in open source communities, have a look at GitHub, where you can find the mentioned IDSA open source landscapes. We think that this approach maximizes the possibilities, and it's open for everyone to become a contributor. And well, we have a three-stage approach. First, the ideas think tank to really maintain early discussions. You see here the GitHub address. We share also this information later on. We also then have ideas G pre repository to prepare recommendations and specification, which are then approved by the ideas working groups. And finally, then it is decided, okay, these topics will be maintained in the real ideas G, which is public and stable state of specifications, where a continuous release circle is maintained. So then on adoption, we also have a quite structured way forward that we start from ideas, use cases to prepare to bring these use cases also into business cases, and then a full adoption can be guaranteed with the support of IDSA, but there the work really has to be done, and is already done by the companies themselves. I want to focus on one issue which is quite interesting, the data space radar. We are trying since 2 years to map and monitor the progress of all IDS uptakes worldwide. And it's quite an interesting endeavor, this data space radar, which is divided into domains. So we have inspiring success stories there from different industries or different domains. We also have a maturity level approach. So we are covering use cases from business case generation to real life implementations, and also a progress monitoring, which is linked to this data space radar. And you see here that, for instance, we have 5 domains currently. And from the outer circle to the inner circle, the maturity is increasing. So first in the outer ring, we have the lead-ins. Then we have use cases which are quite committed in a maturity perspective, that they are pilot implementations, and then they are real-life implementations. And you see that here we have a group of projects or companies who have started to code their own connectors to set up with these connectors their data space use cases. And we hope that this use case radar will grow in the coming weeks and months and years, that hopefully we have an uptake in industry which is even more and more interesting like this one. Let me finally maybe point on use cases which are so big or have developed into really big data ecosystem uptakes. There are several to mention, some smaller, which are just in a group of companies, but I want to mention 3 of them which are quite broad. And I want to start with the mobility data space, which was kickstarted in Germany by ACATEC. This is the German Academy of Technical Science. It is on seamless mobility and well, creating a functional blueprint. They started 1.5 years ago, then starting with implementations to build this business ecosystem, and then finally they also established half a year ago their own operational company, that we now can say that this group of companies, I think there are 100 or 150 companies in this mobility data space, from very big companies like the German railway, the French railway, but also smaller IT and software companies. They are now on the border or on the step to make a step to create a real European mobility data space. This is worthwhile to observe. I think for those of you who are active on LinkedIn, just try to follow mobility data space. Quite interesting what these guys are doing. The other 2 initiatives I want to mention is Catena-X. You might have heard about it. It is an automotive, I would call it a comprehensive supplier network based on data sharing. And these Catena-X automotive data space is based on IDS and on Gaia-X. And the third one, which I want to mention, comes more from the logistics environment. It is from the Dutch colleagues of TNO. They kickstarted already 2 or 2.5 years ago the so-called Smart Connected Supplier Network. If you are interested, follow them. This is also really interesting what they are doing and how they implement IDS and Gaia-X activities. Now maybe finally to conclude, a look to the European sphere. So if we observe the data strategy of the European Commission, which was published already 2 years ago, we see that also the European Commission proposed data space and sees data spaces as a core element of future data ecosystem, and they proposed these 9 data spaces in 9 key sectors. And again, if you read through these documents of the European Commission, it's the same: no silos, enlarge the data pool is important, and cross-sectoral benefits. It took us a little bit to convince the European Commission to completely uptake on this, but I think finally this is also done. And Rosanna already mentioned it. IDSA is engaged in some of the data space related research projects. I have listed here some of them, and in the lower part we also have some German projects which are funded by the German government. Let me also mention one of these projects, especially. This is the OpenDI project. It's a CSA, a coordination and support action. And last year, within this project, we have set up a task force, bringing expertise from more than 36 projects from the European Commission together, jointly working on a publication which is called Design Principles for Data Spaces. And for those of you who are interested, have a look on it. It's really an interesting publication, which is even more comprehensive than the IDS documents, because it is including Gaia-X architecture patterns and other architectures from other endeavors into it. So this is also of interest for those of you who are interested. Finally, I want to mention that recently, just before Christmas last year, International Data Spaces Association has partnered with Gaia-X and Fireware and BDVA on the so-called Data Spaces Business Alliance. Why? Because we observed that all 4 organizations had sooner or later mentioned data spaces as their core value proposition, or included it into their core value proposition. And what we are doing currently is that we are mapping the reference architectures of these 4 initiatives and create common working groups, common committees, just for the reason that it wouldn't be wise to do it separately, because then the exchange in between these 4 organizations wouldn't be as good as it is now. So I think this is a quite interesting endeavor, and also here for those of you who are interested, observe it. There will be soon a new document which is exactly the merge or the mapping of the architecture models, and also the data spaces radar, which I briefly introduced, will be complemented by use cases and by projects of the other 3 organizations shortly. Yeah, I think below here on the bottom we have the work plan of Data Spaces Business Alliance for the next 24 months. There are certain things which will come up. Also, the open source components will be brought together. There are already some Gaia-X related open source repositories which are facilitated or maintained within the Eclipse Foundation. Also very interesting to observe. Yeah, and I think this is basically what I wanted to share with you. In a nutshell, we have here the different topics which I tried to explain. And finally, I also want to mention that we also have a mechanism in place with some hubs in different countries. These are members of our organization which help us to spread the word about IDS and about Gaia-X in the respective countries. And in Italy, it is Cefril from Milano, which is helping us to transfer, to set up certain activities in this direction. So that is basically what I wanted to share with you. I hope you could get an overview on this. And for those of you who are interested, please connect to me. I'm not a data researcher, therefore I cannot go very deep into the different technologies which I presented, but I'm very happy to connect within our IDS community to the universities, to the research and technology organizations who have worked on the different topics. And yeah, I think, Rosanna, this is for the time being my input. I think now we have enough time to discuss, and I hope that that there are questions or maybe topics which we can deepen a little bit. Thank you for the time being.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Thorsten. I think the presentation was clear, and it was a good summary of the activities that you are doing. So maybe I can start with a question. Let's say maybe you were mentioning these examples that are inside this data space business alliance. You were speaking about the examples about the data space created in the mobility area, or this data space in the automotive sector. So would you like to take one example and to explain, I don't know, how many actors, for example, are involved, which kind of data they manage to share, or some information just to have an idea, yes, of what we are talking about?
Of course, of course. I mean, I can maybe also start with explaining why for IDSA and Gaia-X it was so important to join forces a little bit, okay, and why we, yes, created this data space business alliance. I think there are differences. You might have observed that this Gaia-X endeavor, which was kickstarted by the French government and the German government 2 years ago, really had a lot of political power, I would say, to explain it diplomatically, and this also caused a little bit of challenges, because from the very beginning everything was very political, and I think this is already now one of the major challenges of Gaia-X, because politics and governments are so much involved that they are always discussing about everything and nothing before they really are able to bring things into operation. And in contrast, IDSA is very much industry-based and industry-driven, and we have not been established by politics and by governments, but by industry, and therefore the uptake and the work in our working group is very fast, it's very comprehensive, but we are not so good in marketing and spreading the word about it, because we do not have the full political support, I would say. And therefore, in Gaia-X, when they started to work on their federated data sharing scheme, on their federated service, immediately in the working group, it was clear that the IDS standard is something where Gaia-X definitely has to build on, and is now currently building on. And if we see this and have such a usual stack of a data ecosystem, the first layer, which is data sharing layer, virtual data infrastructure, this is what IDS brings in. And then the cloud perspective, the federated services in between several cloud providers. This is what Gaia-X brings in. And from a logical perspective, this is exactly what data spaces are about, and therefore it was, from our understanding, a logical step that Gaia-X and IDSA started to merge. Everything is to enable big data big data activities, therefore BDVA, and also Fireware with their platform schemes, with their open source experience, is definitely working on data spaces, and therefore this step was last year, just before Christmas, a logical step from our point of view. I just explain it a little bit more comprehensively, because people always ask us, why are you collaborating with them so much? Or they even ask us, have you merged now into one organization? No, it's not about merging. It's just bringing the best of each of the four initiatives together, and not to reinvent the wheel.
Yes.
All in all.
Yes,
So, yeah.
Because I also think that they, as far as I know, the little that I know is that they approach the problem, the data problem, from different perspective. No, each of you have a different perspective on on data, but so maybe and for this reason it was also important, I guess, to get together, to merge this different view on data. Okay, so I see that Paolo has raised a hand, so I let Paolo comment or make a question, please.
Thank you, Rosanna. I have to say a couple of questions. First of all, it is clear that data sharing is a crucial point for all of us, industry, science, and so forth. And the first question, you mentioned something in your presentation, but I was wondering if, in one sense, if the association is also dealing with aspect of security. Data sharing means security, and this is the first question. Immediately the second answer, you can, in order to allow you to provide both together. Both answers together. The second question is quite a curiosity, because I got from information from your association and also your presentation, you talk about also open source. That is another crucial point, as the other main actors in the scientific community in Europe and also in the world. Also CNR is fully involved now in the trajectory towards I have to say, open science, and so just a comment from you about this aspect. Not only open source in terms of free access to software, for example, or something similar, but also in terms of free access to information. From our point of view, from looking at scientific information, just to request of comments from your side.
Thank you. Yes, of course, Paolo. First, the security topic. I mean, this is exactly the point, and if we think about the data ecosystem and the components which are proposed by IDSA, these are the connectors. So an IDS connector is a software implementation or software component. And within this IDS connector, first of all, the reference model describes already 4 different security profiles or trust profiles of these connectors. And as these connectors are completely technology agnostic, meaning that you can use every kind of technology which is running within the connector. Of course, different and very comprehensive security functions are possible. And of course, there are data ecosystems. For instance, when you connect companies or use cases which share very sensitive data, very valuable data, then of course the requirement from the companies is that the security profiles are very, very high within the IDS connectors. This would be then the 4th stage of security profiles. But if you, for instance, share data which do not have such a I would say, sensitive nature, which is, for instance, also a combination of already open data, which you can find just by browsing or by investigating, then of course the security functions are not as high as for the other case. And this is foreseen, and I think I can also later on share a publication where especially the security topic in IDS is described in a position paper on this topic. Then on open source, I mean, this is an issue, as I'm not a data scientist or a data engineer. I only can repeat what my colleagues and the experts, and especially the representatives of our member companies say. So the requirement is, or was, clearly articulated 2 or 3 years ago, that all the uptake and the development of IDS into a de facto standard will only work if industry will sooner or later work with it, use it in their own software components. And therefore, to bring everything into an open source repository was a requirement from the majority of our member companies, especially those companies who are really working on software components. And this is, we have also been, I wouldn't say we have been surprised, because our experts have always been active in open source endeavors, but for instance, the management of our association, the board members, they really needed a time to understand the full potential of open source communities, how this works, and also the notion that even though it is free for everyone to access, it doesn't mean that companies are not earning money with it. Yeah, because this is what I think a lot of people experience, that also on open source there are business models, of course, possible, and companies are in a very good position with their open source components to earn a lot of money around this. But you are right. This is, I think, a direction which is, I wouldn't say it is young, but the uptake in IDSA is just maybe 1 or 1.5 years old, and the IDSG project nowadays develops into quite interesting community. So, if you are interested in more detail in this open source, I definitely have to connect you with my colleague, our CTO, Sebastian Steinbus, because he's I would say the guru of our open source community, and also the one who is responsible for it. And he would love to have a chat with you in very detail, or on the strategic and philosophy aspects or philosophical aspects of open source.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your answer, and also for the material, because you mentioned that probably you could provide us some material and also the content. Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Paolo. I see that there is another question from Fulvio Giovanni. So maybe Fulvio, if you want. Hi.
Okay, thank you very much. So first, thanks for your nice presentation, and for the people at CNR who set up this event. So my question is about data spaces and something more like processing, because at some point the data has to be consumed by a software, an algorithm, or something like that. So you have also the problem of processing, so where the processing happens, and in general, so the infrastructure. So I wonder whether we should consider, let's say, a broader view, not just data spaces, but a sort of comprehensive way that includes data processing, transport, and so on. So I just wonder your opinion on this point.
I would answer maybe in this way, that the connection of various data endpoints where data is processed already, of course, needs to tackle the whole data supply chain, if we could call it. Maybe I understand your question right, that this processing of data is something which could be described as a data supply chain, where data in motion is tackled and is used for certain reasons. And there as I said, the IDS proposal is completely agnostic, and we do not care about how and where, how and with which technologies data is processed. It belongs to this comprehensive view or perspective of data spaces. So I think we are talking finally on the same matter, but as the data space approach of IDS gives the perspective of the data ecosystem, the framework for it, the ways how data are processed, what is done with data, are the algorithms connecting within the different connectors or within the different data sources, and then collecting metadata, learn from it, or is it vice versa? This is possible. So it's a quite open approach, and I think the perspective which you just mentioned is completely right, but it is already included.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So, I don't know, are there other questions? I don't see other questions, so, yes. So, please, Lucanos.
Okay. So thank you very much, Thorsten, for your very nice talk about this interesting topic. My question is a comment about this interesting infrastructure for data management, and it's related probably to an industrial point of view. And what I mentioned is, what about I mean, a kind of copyright or kind of sensitive data because as you mentioned, there are several companies that probably works in the same framework, and that are able to share data, but there are also a kind of competition between them. So how is possible to manage this aspect in this infrastructure? And a last question about the data mobility, that is very, very interesting for our point of view, for example, because we in our research activity, we work about a model to predict some kind of, for example, in the case of traffic and so the distribution of vehicles and so on. But what we need is data, real data. So it's very difficult to have this real data. So this kind of structure could give us the possibility to have this real data for a company, for example, and in order to improve this model and to give the possibility to give the result, the outreach to the company, because the results of the research activity is to improve also a kind of industrial productivity and so on. Thank you very much.
So thank you for these two topics and the related questions. So on the first one, what you have described are the obstacles or the challenges which companies mostly see when they engage in data sharing. And of course, IDSA is a technical way. One could describe it as it's a technical way or a technology or a way, an approach to overcome this and to translate legal rules or rules which have been written in between companies into technology, and to enforce these rules, whether these rules are coming from, for instance, national data acts or the European data acts, or if they have already agreed upon different companies. So therefore, yes, this is of course a question, and it is tackled, and we call this usage constraints. So there are usage control policies which are available, which could be tagged, for instance, on data, and then a company who is sharing this data set or this kind of data with another company can say, okay, for instance, just as an example, Monday and Wednesday the other company can use the data for free, and on Saturday and Sunday they have to pay for it, or it's only allowed to use the company to use the data in a machine which is doing this or that. And if another machine which is working on something else, then it's not possible to use this data. So these are these usage control technologies which are included in the approach, and which finally then guarantees or enforce certain rules or data protection or data topics which have been agreed upon companies. And the perspective is also that even though companies have not before agreed on it, they can find the rules already in the different trust profiles. Okay. This is also possible, and I think it is related to what you mentioned. Okay. I hope this gives a little bit
no, very interesting, and it's a very complex structure, but it's very it's a high grade of flexibility, so it's interesting.
Exactly, and please, if you are interested in more detail, have a look. There are 2 publications on our website. They are called IDS and Data Usage Technologies, and there you have a group of experts from I think from London, from University of London, but also from Fraunhofer in Kaiserslautern, who have a very elaborated viewpoint on this, and they are really experts on this data usage technologies.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome.
Okay, let me do another the last question because now this last part made me think another problem or another perspective. No, so we have on one side we have these big players, these big companies, both IT providers or the OEM of the supply chain, and on the other side we have 1,000 of small and medium companies that both among the producer of machines, for example, and the manufacturing companies. So I think the main actors are these, at least in the manufacturing sector. So what's the feeling from these actors? How much do they understand the need, or how much they are aware, and how are you working to put together the interests of all these people? Because of course this is another webinar. I think this is another webinar because it's at least I mean I am in the cluster. I am working in the cluster for intelligent factories in Italy, and this is a big issue that the companies are raising, for especially when we talk about Italy and Germany. So
I know exactly.
So just few words. Just a few words.
I will answer in 2 parts. So first answer is yes. These companies are aware. They can articulate their requirement and also their fear. But of course, they have challenges to uptake and to implement such data space approaches. But my second part of the answer is also they do not have to understand, because there will be software companies and IT service providers who will have data sovereignty standards within their products, and it is maybe comparable to Bluetooth. Think about 20 years ago, there were some crazy North American and South Korean experts who were thinking about creating a new way of communication transmittance for any kind of applications. And then what happens was, I think, comparable to IDS and to Gaia-X. A group of companies came together in an organization which was called the Bluetooth Special Interest Group. And they created a de facto standard, And nowadays, everyone has Bluetooth logo somewhere. I have it in my mouse, I have it in my mobile phone, and I do not care how it works. I do not even understand it. I simply want to use it. And I think this is what we should try to reach also for small and medium manufacturing companies. They have the requirement, and then someone should just deliver, and they should just use it. So this is a short answer, maybe with a short story on Bluetooth Special Interest Group, but I think it's interesting to compare.
Okay then, so if there are no other questions, I think we can thank Thorsten for his availability to present this initiative and to share with us some ideas. So from my side, thank you again. And I don't know, Paolo, if you want to close.
Absolutely. Thank you also from my side. Thank you to Thorsten to stay with us this evening and for a very, very interesting contribution. Thank you very much. And thank you to Rosanna to invite you to this meeting. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Buona serata. Buona serata.
Bye. Bye.
Grazie.